Oh, okay. Hold on. We are live. And we had this problem last week as well that we aren't live everywhere. We're only live on Facebook. StreamYard's having some issues. So if you guys want to talk for a minute, say hi to everyone. I will resolve this really quick.
Sure. Hello,
It was
everybody.
a lot more difficult last week. It was just me. And I was like, oh no, what do I do?
You try to talk and do the work at the same time.
Well,
So
Chris has pie at her branch if you come to her branch today.
Yep. We're doing a pie on Pie Day. So first come, first serve. We're going to put it out at 2:00. So no ice cream or coffee with it, but.
All right, we're almost there.
I've been getting so much reading done. I have a longer drive to work in Otisville now, and I do audiobooks, and I've been getting maybe 3 extra books a month. And
wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. I know people always go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. That's the perk of a longer commute.
Yes.
Yeah, I have people always say, why don't you listen to audiobooks? I'm like, I drive 10 minutes to work. I don't.
Yeah, no, it's harder then. Yeah, that's what my drive used to be. And I've got some digital books on the screen, but I never really get to them here. And so, yeah, I've got like 4 books at a time going now. I used to just read one. It's a little disconcerting sometimes, but you just have to get back into the vibe of the book that you're reading. Skip around, jump around a little bit.
Yeah, my commute's only like 5 minutes, so I would never be able to finish an audio.
Exactly. No, I'm enjoying this. And it helps me to remember to take my phone to work and to get it before I leave too. Because usually I forget my phone at work. I forget my phone everywhere.
All right, we are live everywhere now. So if you've been watching on YouTube, you've had a little sneak peek behind the scenes. But we are now live everywhere. So thank you for joining us. If you're just tuning in to this month's March 2023, what are you reading? Where we're going to talk about what our librarians here have been reading. How are all of you doing?
We're doing great.
Good.
All right. There's only 3 of us now. As we mentioned last time, we no longer have Kristen with us. But that's okay. We will keep going. We have an unofficial Pie Day theme we came up with at the last minute here. We're talking about how Chris has pies there at the Fenton branch right now. I don't think this will tie into any of our books in any way. If you guys can figure out a way to tie that in, between now and when we talk about the book, that would be really impressive. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive right into this. We'll start at the top of the list here. Before I start, let me just say really quick, again, our program guide is now out for the spring. You can find it at all 19 of our branches. You can also find it on our website at thegdl.org. And at thegdl.org/events, you can see all of our programs coming up on our calendar, both in person and virtual. And if you're watching along here, whether it's on our website or on Facebook or YouTube, wherever it may be, feel free to leave us a comment. Let us know if you've read any of these books and let us know what you've been reading. All right, with all that being said, let's start at the top of the list here. Sherry, you can start us off. What do you want to talk about first?
So my first book is The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner, and it doesn't have anything to do with pie, but I did realize all my books today start with L. So I feel a little Sesame Street being like, my books, this is sponsored by the letter L. But the first one, London Seance Society, it just came out last Tuesday, I believe. And it's by the author of The Lost Apothecary, which I think I talked about a long time ago. So the premise of the book is Lena Wicks has come to Paris in 1873 to be an apprentice to Vaudelin Dallaire, who's a renowned spiritualist. Vaudelin holds seances so that people may speak to their deceased loved ones. And Lena's sister Evie was the true believer, and she had apprenticed for Vaudelin until she was murdered. So Lena takes the apprenticeship because she desperately wants to find out who killed her sister. She doesn't necessarily believe in talking to the dead, but she's actually pretty skilled at what Vaudelin gives her to do. So Vaudelin's then called back to London to participate in a seance for a former mentor who was also murdered. So Lena joins her back in London with the hope of still finding out what happened to Evie. So they're secretly staying at an all-male London seance society. The members take money for participating in seances. So they're secretly staying in a room at the London Seance Society, and they discover some suspicious activity that may have played a hand in at least 2 deaths. And they have to figure out what happened before they wind up dead too. So I loved The Lost Apothecary, and I worried that the author wouldn't be able to top that one. I feel like she has in this one. It's pretty clear she did a lot of research into the spiritualism movement in the Victorian era. And the setting is perfect. It's creepy, gothic, and it's full of suspense. I was trying to think of a book I could compare it to, and I really can't think of one at the moment. But yeah, if you're looking for something kind of creepy and gothic and historical, this would be perfect.
How scary is it on a scale of 1 to 10? Is it scary or just kind of spooky and creepy?
I would say maybe a 5 because it's not really scary. It's more creepy.
Kind of like the mood and the atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely kind of a gothic atmosphere.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Sherry. And Chris, what do you want to talk about first?
So my first book is Maisie Chen's Last Chance by Lisa Yee. This is a 2023 Newbery Honor Award winner, and it's just around 288 pages for junior fiction. It mixes modern day storytelling with some historical fiction. It tells the story of Maisie Chen, a young Asian American girl who lives in California with her mom. They have to go to Last Chance, Minnesota to help her grandparents with their Chinese restaurant. Her grandfather is sick, so her mother and herself are going to go and help her grandmother with the restaurant. And Macy, I think she's only 11 in the story, is kind of enlisted to help babysit grandpa. He doesn't want to leave the restaurant, but he's so sick that the doctor's like, no, you need to stay home. And so she kind of gets the role of the babysitter. And excuse me, while she's at home with him, he tells her stories of her great-great-grandfather back in the early 1900s. And he reveals a history to Maisie that she's never heard about called, it's about the Paper Sons. And it is based on true history. Back in the 1900s when Chinese people came over to the United States. It was very fascinating to read about the Paper Sons and kind of a little bit about the discrimination against the Chinese workers who helped build the railroad. This book has a lot to offer. There's a little mystery in it. There's lots of friendship. The theme of family is really strong throughout it because her, Maisie's the granddaughter, and her grandpa's telling her these stories about his great grandpa, I think is who it ultimately ends up being. So it's very rich in character development. The sense of place is clearly defined. You really understand what Last Chance Minnesota is about and how the Chinese restaurant actually ended up in Last Chance Minnesota. The best line I've read in a long time came in probably about the first 30 pages of this book. I don't want to tell what it is because it's kind of an integral part to the story and how Macy learns a lot about people and their prejudices and that first impressions aren't always reliable. So I didn't read the award winner this year yet. This was one of the honor books. And when I finished it, I would totally give this the award because I absolutely loved and adored it.
How often does that happen for you where like a certain passage or a line really like sticks out to you and stays with you?
A lot of times I used to do it a lot, but I feel like lately it just nothing has really jumped out at me. So when this came about, I was just like, huh. And I wrote it down on a slip of piece of paper. And it was interesting how when I got to the end of the story, that sentence really spoke a lot to me about the story. So.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really interesting. Thank you, Chris. All right, Nancy, what is your first book?
Secluded Cabin, Sleep 6 by Lisa Unger.
I like the name already.
A thriller, a suspense, a mystery. This book was so good, and I was seeing it everywhere. It was popping up everywhere, so I decided to read it. And I don't usually read thrillers, but I find that I read them very fast because I can't wait to find out who did it. And I try not to look at the last chapter. I try really hard. So this one, these people are wealthy. One is a tech guru, one brother, and he invites everyone to this, like an Airbnb. And that's one of my weird things too, to think that somebody might be spying on you at an Airbnb, or that some evil intent could be afoot. You're already in a strange place. So to me, that just sounded creepy. And then the other thing that happens before they leave for this Christmas break, they open all their gifts, and somebody has given everybody the genealogy test kits for Christmas, and nobody will admit to giving them. So obviously there's going to be something weird about these people's genealogy. They aren't who they seem to be, or somebody's not really related, or they're related to somebody creepy. I don't know. It just seems really suspenseful. And then the other piece of this puzzle is the owner of this Airbnb is kind of a weirdo. When they get there, there's bone sculptures, and there's a head of a bear on a wall, which that's not creepy in and of itself, but I don't know. The whole cabin just gives a creepy vibe. And then a deadly storm is brewing. So it was a quick read. I read it really fast because I wanted to know what happened. And it's the kind of book that makes you realize that wealthy people aren't necessarily happy people. So it gets into the lives of all. It's 3 couples, so it's 6 people plus the owner, and you get into the lives of all of these people, and they're not as happy as you would assume. And there's a lot of complications in their lives. So very interesting, very good read. There's a reason it's on the bestseller list. It was very good. Came out in November of 2022, so you can get it now on hold if you. You don't even have to have a hold for it now.
Is there any particular part or passage, like Chris had mentioned, that stands out to you in this book, Nancy?
There's not a passage, but just the scene that he sets. There's a sculpture. It's obviously probably very expensive, but in the foyer, there's a sculpture that's made out of human bones. And I just think that's just a weird visual. So that's something that I wouldn't forget. That's very creepy. I wouldn't have that in my home.
All right. Thank you. Sherry, what's up next?
So the next one is The Lost English Girl by Julia Kelly. It is historical fiction. It starts before World War II, but you can kind of see World War II coming. So Viv Byrne is a young Catholic girl growing up in Liverpool in 1935. She becomes pregnant by Joshua, a Jewish boy who dreams of becoming a jazz musician. So they get married, basically because they have to. But Viv's mother dangles money in front of Joshua, and he decides to follow his dream in America. So basically, the Catholic mother just wants her daughter to be married before she has the baby, but she definitely doesn't want a Jewish son-in-law around. So Viv is forced to stay behind with her overbearing and critical parents and raise her daughter basically alone. They live with her parents, but her parents don't really show any love for her or her daughter. So once World War II breaks out, Viv sends Maggie to the countryside to keep her safe, which a lot of parents did with their children. They thought they'd be safer away from the cities in case of any bombs falling. She doesn't really want to send her, but their Catholic priest convinces her that that's what's best. So to keep herself busy, she starts to work for the Postal Service. And she comes across Joshua's parents who happen to be on her route. So she thinks that Joshua's parents have ignored her, but it turns out that they thought she had ignored them. So they get closer, and at the same time, Joshua heads back home when the war starts to join the Royal Air Force. Then a horrible bombing threatens everything they both know, and it takes years before they know the extent of what happened to their daughter and why. So it's kind of a mystery wrapped up in the historical fiction. And there's a lot of World War II books on the market, as we all know, but this one I thought was a standout. Along with looking into the history of evacuated children, it takes a good look at the relationship between Catholics and Jews in the 30s and 40s in England. I think you'll be delighted by how strong a character Viv is and how her relationship with Joshua's family develops.
All right. Thank you, Sherry. Who you read a lot of historical fiction, things like this. Who would you recommend this for?
I think anyone who liked like Kristen Harmel or Kate Quinn would probably like this one.
All right. Are there any books you read that are kind of remind you of this one?
The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel has like a similar kind of a theme. I haven't read, I know there's other ones that have to do with evacuated children, but this is the first one I've read.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Sherry. And all right, Chris, what is next?
The next one I'm going to talk about is The Plot by Jean Hanff Korelitz. It's a 2021 offering, and it's her 7th novel. The main character is Jacob Finch Bonner, and Finch does come from, oh my gosh, I just drew a blank. To Kill a Mockingbird. He really likes that story. He sees himself as a writer, so he adopts Finch as his middle name. So Jacob Finch Bonner is a one-hit wonder author who has had success with his first book, but has since failed to produce another good book. So the story actually begins that he is teaching a creative writing symposium at a small college on the East Coast. He meets an arrogant student, and the student shares the idea of a plot that's sure to be the next big thing. Of course, Bonner doesn't think this kid knows what he's talking about, but then as he reveals the plot, he's like, he might be onto something here. So a little bit of time passes, and Bonner kind of jumps around from different jobs, still trying to write his next great book, which he doesn't do. And then he discovers that this arrogant student has died and has failed to publish this sure-bet plot-driven book. So he sets out to write the story and soon finds himself on top of the publishing word with this sure bet. As he's traveling around on his second world tour, he receives messages accusing him of stealing the plot. So the remainder of the story deals with him investigating this former student who is supposedly dead. He investigates the story and the life, and he's also dealing with the fallout from his theft, his own guilt, how his publisher is not too worried about it. This book is a real quick read. I read it in a couple days. I had it figured out about midway, what I thought was happening. So I think it's a little predictable. My book club is going to discuss it next month, so I'll be curious to see if they also thought the same thing. I also found the main character to be a little bit self-absorbed. The writer, Gene Horowitz, kind of indicates that writers are that way anyway. But the last thing I want to say about this particular book is that it's being adapted to an 8-episode series on Hulu, and it will be starring Mahershala Ali. So I probably will check it out because I kind of want to see what they're going to do with it.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize it was being made into a TV show, but I've heard a lot of people talking about it for a while now. And Mahershala Ali is an amazing actor, so that's really exciting. Yeah, so you said you kind of figured it out kind of early on. Do you think it was just sort of do you think it's because they kind of gave you enough clues, or did you kind of sort of like just happen to guess your way into it? How do you think that played out?
I think there was, I don't want to give it away, but I think one of the characters, I was kind of questioning that character, and it kind of like, I bet this is where this is headed. And it sure did that way. I guess, I mean, I would also like to say that in my review of it on Goodreads, I likened the ending to a Stephen King book and character. And I don't want to say exactly which one because I also feel like it might give it away. But I was really kind of shocked as I was reading it by how similar the vibe felt.
Sure. Okay, that's very interesting. I think it's a good bit of information that might draw some people in.
Right.
All right. Nancy, what do you have next for us?
I have Hester by Lori Lico Albanese. I hope I said that right. And it came out in October of 2022. So you can still get that probably without a hold. I heard a lot about this one too. And I remember reading The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I think it's probably required reading in high school, I'm sure. And I really loved that story. And this is about the girl who inspired the story. So I thought that was an interesting twist on it. Isabel, they're from Scotland, and they have to avoid debtor's prison, so they moved to America. Isabel married a man who, at first sight, looked to be very reputable. He was an apothecary, and it ended up that he was addicted to his own supplies, and he was addicted to opium, and he ended up with the threat of debtor's prison. So they moved to the New World, and they end up in Salem, of course, and she meets the young Nathaniel Hawthorne, who's got all of these stories in his head. He's from a very wealthy family. And it turns out that Isabel's family has witches in their background, and Nathaniel Hawthorne has witch burners in his family. So Isabel's husband ends up, he wanted a fresh start in America, but of course that didn't happen. And he ends up hopping on a ship and taking off to be a ship's doctor and kind of leaving her stranded. So she's alone, and she strikes up a friendship with Nathaniel Hawthorne, and things go from there. I don't want to say any more and give anything away because it's a good story. But she sees colors. I think that's interesting. She's a seamstress, and she can see colors. So when she looks at the letter A, it's always red. And she also kind of weaves magic into her embroidery. So it's an interesting plot, and it's got a lot of just sub stories going on in it. And I always am drawn to the witchy books. So this was a very quick read as well. And yeah, it was a good one. And it kind of wraps up the association to the Scarlet Letter very well. I thought it was very well done.
This was one of 2 books that I was really interested in seeing the books list that we're going to talk about today. Because I remember reading The Scarlet Letter, and I really enjoyed The Scarlet Letter. It was years and years ago now. I hadn't heard of this book. I thought maybe it was going to be like a reimagining of that story, which is kind of interesting. But I think this actually sounds way more interesting to me than what I thought it was going to be about.
It's a good twist that she is the woman who inspired The Scarlet Letter.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Nancy. And Sherry, the book you're going to talk about next, I think, is the other book I was really excited about, just because I have heard 3 different librarians who work here now talking about it and how much they've really enjoyed this book. So I don't know much about it, though, so I was curious. I'm excited to hear your take on it.
So it's Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. It's been out for a while, but I know there's still a hold list because it's on the bestseller list. It's won a bunch of awards. It's been on my list for a while, and I just had never gotten around to it. I will say it took me a long time to get through it, and it's not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I had to keep putting it down because it made me mad at how much the main character has to endure throughout the book. So it wasn't a quick read for me. It might be for someone else, but I had to keep setting it down because I was so mad. So Elizabeth Zott is a brilliant chemist who had a difficult childhood. Her parents are con artists, and her father ends up in prison, and her brother commits suicide. I should mention it takes place in the 1950s because that's pretty relevant to how she gets treated. So she's working at the Hastings lab as a chemist, and she meets and falls in love with Calvin Evans, who's another brilliant scientist. They move in together, which is unheard of in the 1950s. Calvin wants to get married. Elizabeth Zott does not. She doesn't feel like marriage is the institution that she wants to participate in. And I don't want to give too much away, but Elizabeth finds herself a single mother without a steady job at some point during the story. She also ends up with a dog whose name is 630 of all things. That's what she decides to name him because that's what time she comes across him. And 630 plays a pretty big part in the book. So then she has a chance encounter with a TV producer while berating him for his daughter stealing her daughter's lunch at school. And he's convinced that she should have her own cooking show. So he gives her a cooking show. It doesn't go well at first. She's a very literal person. She refuses to wear the tight dresses. She comes out in a lab coat of all things, and she refuses to call things vinegar. She calls it acetic acid. She calls everything by their scientific names. But despite the fact that she makes her male producer want to pull his hair out, she becomes a success, teaching her viewers about chemistry and empowering women to be their authentic selves. She also has a bit of a bomb scare during one of her shows because during a previous show, she tells the audience that she doesn't believe in God, and that's just not done in the 1950s. The characters are very quirky, most of them. She tries to teach the dog like words, and he thinks she has him up to like 987 words. Her daughter is like, I think by the end of the book, she's maybe like 9, but she's like a genius. So this book will make you angry. It'll make you laugh because there are some funny parts, and it will also make you cry. But it also made me wish I'd paid more attention in chemistry class. But definitely worth the hype, I thought. Even if it did take me like a month to get through this book, it was definitely worth it.
That's what I was going to ask you. It was worth the wait list, and it seems like it is.
It was. And it'd make
Awesome.
a good book club book, I think.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. Thank you, Sherry.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, what is your next book?
So my last book is Olivia by Ian Falconer. I wanted to share Olivia with listeners today as her creator, Ian Falconer, passed away last week from kidney disease, I think. He was only 63. So I feel like we got cut short on his gifts to children literature. So Olivia was first published in 2000 and immediately received a Caldecott honor for the illustrations for the year of 2000. 12 more titles would follow featuring Olivia through 2017. They come in hardcover and in board book, so they're appropriate for preschool through elementary age children. Each book follows young Olivia the pig in her daily adventures. Her character is funny and energetic. What made her stand out back in 2000 in children's literature was that her color palette, as you can see, is red, black, and white. That color is excellent for early childhood development, especially babies when they're trying to focus their vision and they can look at the page. Those colors stand out for them. Her character for older children connected to these young children as all of her adventures were relatable. He based this character, actually he designed this character for his niece for her birthday. So you can find almost all of the Olivia books in print. You can also find them in our digital library, both as an e-reader and an audiobook. You can find Olivia toys when you're out and about. So she's really made an impact on early childhood development. And I just want to leave you with these words from Olivia that reading never wears me out.
The advice I always give friends I know now who are having kids is to get a black and white book because they love them. Like before you would think a kid could even could enjoy a book, they love it. So that's a great recommendation. Thanks, Chris. All right, Nancy, what's our last book for the day?
Oh, Olivia. My last book is The Hacienda, written by Isabel Cañas, May 3rd, 2022. Mexican Gothic horror. I don't know that I've ever read a book like this before. It was awesome. I loved it. It was creepy and suspenseful. And again, I read it quickly because I wanted to see what was going to happen. And the human characters aren't so much evil as the actual house is evil. So that was really cool. It takes place after the Mexican War of Independence. The protagonist is Beatrice, and she's a young, beautiful woman. Her father was executed and her home was destroyed. So when this handsome, older, wealthy man asks for her hand in marriage, she's aware that he's got this large hacienda. I believe they grow sugar, I think. So she jumps in. She doesn't know a lot about him, but she jumps in. His first wife died of mysterious causes. She's not sure what happened there. So that's in the back of her mind. But then she comes in and the maid doesn't like her. The sister doesn't like her. She's pretty much alone in the house and weird things start to happen. So she really just doesn't know what's going on. She wonders if the house is possessed, so she enlists a priest to help her. And then the story kind of goes from there. And it's a really good tale. I don't want to give any more away, but the relationship between all three of these women who are in the house is very interesting. The relationship between Beatrice and the priest is interesting, and the relationship of the house with its inhabitants is interesting. And it all comes full circle at the end, but it had me reading like every word of every page. So I would highly recommend it. It was a Goodreads editor's pick for best books of 2022. So, and I've been seeing this book everywhere as well. So, right up my alley. It's just good old creepy.
It sounds pretty good. It seems like a very, like you said, like a horror themed book. I guess that's the question I started out asking, like, Sherry, like, how scary is this book? If you're someone who's scared easily, would you be okay reading this? Or would it be too scary?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not scary. A 5 probably.
5? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think those are all the books we have to talk about today. Anything before we go? Would any of you like to say anything or share anything? Any comments about any of the books we talked about?
I like that there's such a good variety. We all have such different reading taste. It's nice. And I always have pencil and paper with me, and I jot down the titles to check out and read eventually. Gives me new ideas as well.
Oh yeah, I always find things that I want to read from here, and I hope other people at home who are watching do as well. Well, thanks all three of you for being here with me and doing another successful What Are You Reading? And we'll be back in April.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
See you later.